All right, let's talk about a word that's right at the heart of every single new idea, every new company: risk. Today, we're going to unpack what it really means when an entrepreneur decides to bet it all on a new venture. So, let me ask you something right off the bat. Are you a risk taker? It feels like a simple yes or no question, right? But what we're about to discover is that the reality of risk, well, it's a lot more complicated and, frankly, a lot more interesting than that.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big picture, then zoom in on the specific challenges entrepreneurs face. We'll break down the different kinds of risk, and then, and this is the really cool part, we'll get into the psychology of it all. Okay, let's jump right in.
First things first. Before we get into business plans or funding rounds, we have to get our heads around the fact that risk isn't just a business term. It's a fundamental idea that pretty much shapes how we all live together. Some thinkers see risk as way more than just a personal choice. It's actually a tool that societies use to protect themselves. Think of it like a boundary line. It's this invisible border that we all kind of agree on to manage danger and keep things from just going completely off the rails. Okay, so now let's zero in. Let's move from society as a whole to that one person who looks at that boundary line and says, you know what, I'm going to step over it. The entrepreneur. What is it that makes their relationship with risk so different? And this isn't some new idea, by the way. This goes way, way back. As early as 1755, this guy Cantillon basically defined an entrepreneur by their willingness to take on risk. It's not a bug, it's the core feature of the job. And then almost 100 years later, Jean-Baptiste Say built on that. He saw the entrepreneur as this central figure who has to organize everything, plan everything, and, this is the key part, absorb all the potential downsides just to create something new and productive. So let's be really clear about this. Risk isn't just one piece of starting a business. The very act of creating something new, of putting your money, your reputation, your time on the line, that is the risk. And it means failure is always, always a possible outcome. Okay, so if taking a risk is basically the price of admission for any entrepreneur, how in the world do you manage it? Well, you start by breaking it down. You have to understand exactly what you're up against. And here are some of the usual suspects. You've got your market risk, like, will anyone actually want this thing? Then there's innovation risk. Is your idea truly new, or is it just okay? You've got production risk. Can you even make it? And of course, there's the personal risk, the fact that you, the founder, might not have all the answers. And this, right here, is such a key distinction. There's the risk the founder takes, the risk of doing the thing, of engaging in the project to make a profit. But then there's the risk the investor takes, the risk of financing the thing to get a return. They're connected, for sure, but their motivations are totally different. But risk doesn't just live in spreadsheets and boardrooms. To see how it works in a completely different world, let's look at this really fascinating case study about musicians at a rave. So picture this. You're a musician at a rave. You've got expensive gear, there's no official security, the location might be sketchy. That's a lot of risk. But here, it's not managed with contracts. It's managed by everyone looking out for each other, by constant vigilance and personal responsibility. It's a great example of how risk management has to adapt to the situation. And that leads us to something really, really important. So far, we've mostly been talking about external threats, but maybe the biggest factor in how we deal with risk isn't what's out there, it's what's in here. It's the powerful filter of our own mind. So, the economist Frank Knight made this brilliant distinction way back in 1921. He said risk is when you can calculate the odds, like in a game of poker. But uncertainty, that's when you don't even know what game you're playing. The situation is so new, you can't predict anything. And that's where entrepreneurs live, in pure uncertainty.
Building on that, Kubinan basically gave us a checklist for what makes a situation risky. It's not just uncertainty. It's having a clear goal despite that uncertainty and knowing you have to gather info to make the best call, because the consequences really, really matter.
So, what does all this mean? It means your appetite for risk isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. It's shaped by your experiences, by your culture, by the people around you. The way you see risk isn't just a fact. It's a story you're telling yourself. Okay, and this brings us to the final, and honestly, the most critical piece of the puzzle for anyone trying to build something new. This is the distinction that separates panic from real preparation. On one hand, you have real risk. This is the objective truth, right? The actual data-driven probability of something going wrong. But on the other hand, you have perceived risk. And that's our subjective emotional interpretation of that threat. All our fears, our gut feelings, our biases. The biggest challenge is that telling them apart is incredibly hard. So how did the successful ones do it? They're not reckless. They don't just embrace risk. They're prudent. They do the really hard work of closing that gap between what they feel and what's real. They study the numbers, they map out what could go wrong, they change how they operate, and they stay on high alert. I just love this quote from Hernandez because it completely reframes the whole conversation. Risk isn't a wall you have to get over. It's the whole point of the journey. It's the challenge, the dare that makes the prize worth winning in the first place. And really, that's the bottom line here. You can't eliminate risk from anything ambitious. And honestly, why would you want to? Real mastery isn't about avoiding risk. It's about learning to see it clearly for what it is and for what it isn't. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. In your own life, in your work, in whatever big idea you're dreaming up next, how are you making sure you're responding to reality and not just to the story you're telling yourself about it?